meetings as the local water company, and it always amazes me in many, many public meetings that I attend, somebody always comes up to me afterwards and says, why do we have to pay for water at all? It should be free. And to which I say, yes, it is free. Go get a bucket and collect it, and you could use as much as you want, you know. But the problem is it costs money to store it. It costs money to transmit it through pipes. It costs money to pump it. And it's amazing, you know, how many people don't get that. You know, they just turn on their faucets and the water comes streaming out. Okay, so I'm going to touch on some of the things that Peter touched on and some other things as well. But just real briefly, I wanted to just introduce our company because I thought some of you might not know too much about it. Talk very briefly about our local water supply. And then I'll get into some sustainability points on water usage and conservation, on water resources and production, on energy management, and on facility vulnerability due to climate change. So first of all, a lot of people don't realize this, but United Water, the local company here, is part of a very large company called Suez Environment. And Suez Environment operates water systems throughout the world. They actually supply water to 92 million people throughout the world, 65 million people for sanitation services, and some 50 plus million people for wastewater. So it's a really big company. And it's kind of interesting being part of a company like that because they bring a lot of interesting technology. But getting a little bit closer to Earth here, I'm part of the Water North America company, and we're a traditional water and wastewater company. We serve about 6.5 people in 19 states. We have about 2,500 employees. We have total assets of $3.2 billion. And now getting down even closer to where we live in Rockland County, in our little neck of the woods, we serve about 280,000 people. We have 120 employees, and we have assets of about $400 million. So just to give you an idea of how we fit into the world. So water supply in Rockland County, is there a pointer on this? Is that? Yeah. So just to give you a brief idea, this is Lake DeForest. It's one of our largest water supplies. It's along the Hackensack River, and we in Rockland County get a lot of water from the treatment plant located at this reservoir. And then these little dots are wells that we have spread throughout the county. There's some 60 or so wells that are driven down into the bedrock, and we take quite a lot of water out of those systems. Interestingly, and kind of along to what Peter was talking about, these are not the only wells in the county. The county residents have the rights to drill their own wells also. So on top of this, there's some 6,000 wells in private homes that people have for their own purposes, and they're relatively unregulated, which is kind of an interesting dilemma for us in terms of shared resources and competition for resources. Anyway, so we have all these wells throughout the county. We also have 10 wells located along the Round Pole River, which are very productive. And we have a couple other small supplies. I was telling Peter earlier today that we actually operate a small water system up in Harriman Park also. So that's kind of the situation, bounded on the east by the Hudson River, on the northwest by the Palisades Interstate Park Commission, and to the south is our sister company, United Water New Jersey. Now this is kind of how it breaks down. We have about 10 million gallons per day coming from Lake DeForest, about 12 million gallons per day coming from bedrock wells, and about 6 from the Round Pole Valley well field. And these are just some pictures of the Lake DeForest Dam, which you can actually see if you drive up. It's not far from here. And this is the treatment system on the Round Pole Valley well field, which I referred to. You know, not all of our supplies are clean because they get subject to contamination. In this particular case, this well field was contaminated by an industrial solvent, and we had to put these big towers on to strip the solvent out. They're called air strippers. And it's a very effective way to remove the contaminant, but these are some of the things that we have to deal with. And I'm guessing that most of you don't have a feel for what it means to say 28.5 million gallons per day. What on earth does that really mean? So I tried to put it in practical terms And you know, here's your typical oil tanker that will move oil from the Mideast to the U.S. It holds 25 million gallons. So think of it that way. We in this county use about a little bit more than a tanker's worth of water every day for our normal indoor and outdoor purposes. So that was a very brief background on water. Let's call it Water 101 for Rockland County and so forth. There's a lot more on that subject. But on sustainability, you know, first I want to talk a little bit about consumption and how it plays into conservation. We see this trend here, you know, in our systems and throughout the country. This is a graph showing the per capita consumption, so that's gallons per day per person, versus time. And what you see is that back in 2000, the consumption per person was about 65 gallons per person per day, and now it's you know, roughly about 50, 56, 57 gallons per person per day. So this is a very common trend in the water industry, and it's very relevant for us. Does anyone have any idea on what causes this decrease in consumption? Any guesses?
Consensus that we have to be green and like conserve water. Maybe?
That's a really good answer. You would think that that's what it is. It's a behavioral thing, and to some extent you're right. But mostly what it is just people changing out fixtures and appliances in their homes. So when people put a new washing machine, when they put a new faucet, when they put a new toilet, it uses less water than the old technology, and that's what's driving the per capita consumption down. So that's a trend that we have to contend with, as I'll talk about. And then this is residential, and on the commercial and industrial side, you can see our commercial customers have been also experiencing some downward trend, not as much. And industrial, you know, we actually lost some major customers in Rockland County in the last 5 or 6 years, and that's why you see this part of the economic recession and part of just the world of business. Things move around, and that's what happens. So, what does less water really mean for us in terms of sustainability? Well, if we use less water, then we're preserving the resource. You know, there is that aspect to it. If you're using less, you're preserving it in the environment as a natural resource. It takes energy to produce water, so if you need less water, you produce less energy. It also takes chemicals to produce water that we can drink, you know, specifically with disinfectants, you know, to keep the water clean. So less water means less chemicals, so there's a sustainability component to that. And this ties into what Peter was saying also, the economics of it, and I'm glad that you folks have some background in this. Less water also means less revenue for a water company like ours. And how do we deal with that? Well, the fact of the matter is a company like ours with 1,000 miles of pipe and hundreds and hundreds of pumps and dams, we have this infrastructure to maintain. And even if we use a little less water in the county, we still have to maintain the infrastructure. So what always drives people crazy is the concept that, gee, if we're conserving water, we're using less water, but you jacked up our rates. And you know, that's one of the ironies of this. Using less water, rates have to be a little higher in order to still produce the amount of money to properly invest in the infrastructure. Now, on the positive side of that, you don't have to invest money, possibly don't have to invest money for new supplies, which is expensive, so there could be an offset on that. Getting a little bit more on economics, one way we can encourage conservation is conservation-oriented rates. So this is the law of demand and supply. If you charge more for a commodity, people will buy less. Now, it so happens in water, it's a little trickier than that because there's this concept called elasticity, which you may have heard of. And you know, people don't tend to react very strongly to price for water because it's a basic need that people have. But nonetheless, there is a price signal there, so it follows the law of economics. Education is real important for conservation, particularly with regard to managing outdoor water usage, because people often apply more water outdoors than they need to. Promoting water-efficient fixtures is something that we're going to be doing, actually probably starting next year. where we may offer rebates for certain types of appliances to encourage conservation. You can see up in the right-hand corner, an old toilet used 5 gallons per flush, and a new toilet uses 1.3. It's a huge difference when you multiply that by the number of people who we serve. Water audits is something that we're doing. We go out to facilities and work with the facilities managers to see if there's a way they can save water. And then a big one for us is, I mentioned again, the 1,000 miles of pipe we have. You know, you can't have 1,000 miles of pipe and not have quite a few leaks in the pipes. So trying to reduce those leaks and manage them is an expensive proposition, but it's a proposition worth doing because you save a lot of water. And also, amazingly, I don't know if anyone's ever thought this, but we have quite a lot of theft of service of water. People tap prior to the meter and take water without paying for it. It's very difficult to find, but it does happen, and it's interesting. And I don't know why I put the cat up there, I just like it. But on water resources and production, you know, it's important to balance the resources. Also getting at something that Peter said. You saw that we have multiple sources of supply in this county. So it's important not to tax one supply over the other supply. You need to treat them well so you can get the most out of them, which is the next point. When you're talking about sustainability and water resources, it's important to make sure that you can get the most out of your resources and not develop new resources before you've done that. Also, optimizing for chemicals and energy is important, and protecting water quality with the watershed is really important. You know, the quality of the water is what it is because of where we live and the cars that we drive and the things that go into the water. So there's natural runoff of contaminants into the water supply. And you know, having proper watershed management helps us manage that. And most of our water supplies are surrounded by open areas to actually provide a buffer for contaminants before they enter the water. We also have a program, and it kind of gets to what Peter was saying on trading a little bit on wetlands mitigation. This is an interesting concept. It's a concept where if somebody within the similar watershed wants to do a construction project that would impact the wetland, well, you know, this happens, but the states will require in this case that that applicant or that builder does something to preserve a wetland elsewhere. And what will be done is they'll work with us and provide money so that one of our wetlands can be properly preserved. And what I mean by that is our wetlands can have invasive species in them like a mile-a-minute weed or Japanese stilt grass or common reed. These are invasive species for watersheds, for wetlands rather. And if you want to put those wetlands back to their original situation, which is good because it encourages organisms and things to thrive there, then these wetlands need to be managed that way. So this is a trade-off. It's, on the one hand, somebody is developing a wetland or affecting a wetland in one part of the watershed, and on the other hand, they're paying money to preserve a wetland someplace else. This is something that most states allow, and it's similar to the whole cap and trade type of concept. A lot of challenges with our watersheds. There's actually clear cutting that occurs of water company property for people who live around our lakes and reservoirs. If you have a house and that's on a lake or a reservoir, you really like that view of the reservoir. And people take it upon themselves to cut the trees down to enhance their view and maybe enhance the value of their property. It's illegal, but it goes on, and it's difficult for us to control. There's also environmental aspects to that, where if you cut down natural trees, you can create soil erosion, so now that soil can run off into the water. Fertilizers and pesticides no longer have that buffer to stop them from running into the water resources. And it's like I said, it's very challenging to control. I'll show you an interesting picture. This is on our Lake DeForest, which I showed you before. And you can see here, this is a perfect example of a couple of homes that have removed trees that we own and planted grass in order to improve their view and to access the water, which they can't really use anyway because it's a private water. It's a private reservoir. And in some cases, you can start to see the growth beginning to grow back. You would think that with a little education and a little bit of warning that this issue can be controlled properly, but more difficult than you might imagine. So it's a big challenge for us. I want to talk briefly about energy usage. In the U.S., about 3 to 4% of all electric usage in the country is due to water and wastewater, basically pumps and aerators, big equipment. That represents 55 billion kilowatt hours per year, or $4 billion per year. And bringing it home, in United Water, this is all the United Water companies, we expend 520 million kilowatt hours per year. It's $45 million per year, and represents about 10% of our operating costs. This, by the way, is just a little graphic of the blue dots showing where United Water operates systems across the country. Now, we have programs to improve energy efficiency, which is part of sustainability, and this would include things like facility lighting changes. That's that can make a difference. Then pumps are a big source of energy usage, so proper testing of pumps and optimization of pumps to make sure they're running right is a good way to make sure that they're not wasting energy. We replace pumps, obviously, if they're not efficient. Even think about it, when you go back to your dorms and turn the tap on, water comes out with pressure, and it's that pressure. That pressure is created not naturally. Well, if you're in New York City, it is actually naturally because it comes from high up in the Catskills. But here, it comes from pumps, and so the higher the pressure, the more energy they get at that level. And we know as a water provider that sometimes it's not necessary to provide quite as much pressure. A small amount of pressure can be provided, and you can save energy in the process. And then we have a huge number of vehicles to maintain our system, and they use a lot of fuel. So we have a fleet idle reduction policy. In 2014, we've estimated that not idling vehicles unnecessarily saved us 7,500 gallons of fuel, which is good. So here's some broader trends to look at. So on the top left, you can see this is the megawatt hours per million gallon of water produced, and you can see in the in 2010 and 2011. We were at about 2.2 to 2.25 megawatt hours per million gallons. And because of the things that we've done, we've been able to drive that down to 2.1. If you just leave it alone, you don't worry about it, you're gonna be on the higher ratio, you're gonna be on the higher numbers. And if you really pay attention to it, you can drive it down. Now that has an implication on greenhouse gases, and this is an indication of our greenhouse gas emissions from 2010 to 2014. I'd love to stand here and say that we did a good job, and that's why the greenhouse gases are going down, but it's a bit more complicated than that. In the U.S., this really reflects the mix of fuel sources more than anything else. So, these days we're using a lot more of, which type of fuel are we using more of than we have been in the past? Anyone? No guessers? Fracking? More natural gas than we have in the past when we use coal and oil, and that's what's primarily driving that down. And then finally, on climate change and facility vulnerability, try to say that 3 times fast. We have challenges in this country across all levels of infrastructure due to climate change. I mean, whether it be transportation, whether it be wastewater, whether it be water, whether it be electricity. Climate change is challenging all of these institutions, and all of these institutions are heavily involved in looking at ways to mitigate the problem. Sea level rise is a particular issue. We have a utility in southern New Jersey on the coast that was heavily impacted by Sandy, by the storm surge. We lost our major facility, the headquarters there, was basically flooded. and we lost a bunch of homes, so we lost customers. Homes were wiped out, so the customer base was lost. So this is a big issue for us. Another thing to think about is climate change is increasing temperatures, and as temperatures increase, the growing season increases, and as the growing season increases, there's more need for water. And also when it's hotter, people tend to use more water. So this is a concept that's going to buck against the trend that I showed you earlier on diminishing per capita water consumption as temperature increases. We might see some pushback on that. Also flooding, extreme weather events. We've had several of these. In fact, this is a picture of one of our facilities in Pennsylvania that was flooded not too long ago. And the frequency of which it was being flooded had been increasing. So finally we decided to just relocate the whole facility and put it elsewhere. It cost a lot of money to do that, but it also cost a lot of money to fix it every time it floods. So we relocate facilities, we raise electrical equipment. Emergency power is very important for us, because during these big events, these big storm events, you often lose power. So we have to have our own independent power sources at most of our major production sites in order to make sure that we can supply water. Because if you can't supply water, well, it's not just that you can't cook and you can't shower, but there's sanitation issues. I mean, at some point you remember that your toilet's flush because there's water available. And if the water is cut off, then you start running into basic sanitation issues. So it's very important to keep it going. And then finally, I'll just leave you with this thought that climate change or flooding and extreme weather events also can really stir up the water, and it can create big water quality events. So it can make the water real turbid or create algae blooms, which is very difficult to treat. And what we're seeing is that as these events increase in frequency, as temperatures increase, as water temperatures increase, there's new and challenging water quality issues that need to be addressed. And I think that's about it. So I'd love to take any questions if you want.
This should be for both of you. Would you be in favor of penalty rates towards inefficient use of water, such as swimming pools or in the sense of California crops that don't necessarily grow in California, elsewhere? Water is not scarce.
It's a good question. I'm sure Peter will have something to say on it too, but I'll just tell you that in this county here, I don't think we refer to them as penalty rates, but we have winter summer rates already in place. So people pay less in the winter than they do in the summer, and that's to send that price signal to people that in the summer, when we use so much water, especially for outdoor irrigation, there's a clear price signal to say, hey, don't use that much. And it's been effective, but I will say that when it was put into place, it was originally put into place at a 3-to-1 ratio. So water rates in the summer were 3 times higher than in the winter, and it created such an outcry amongst the public that we had to change it to 1.5 to 1. And so obviously that is less effective, but nonetheless, it's still effective. But the concept I think is a good one, that people who use tremendous amounts of water probably should pay a little more for it.
Have a measure of how much water is in the aquifer or Rockland? Have you guys invested in actually trying to figure that out? Because previously you wouldn't bother, right? I mean, you always had enough.
Yeah, it's a good question. We have a pretty good idea of the sustainability of the groundwater. It's not as simple as to say the volume of the forest reservoir is 5.6 billion gallons. The volume of the aquifer is this. I mean, you can say that. I don't even know what the number is, but it depends more on water's moving in from outside sources. But we have a very good idea of what the sustainability of the aquifer is from years and years of good monitoring. Like we have monitoring wells in addition to our company wells all over the county, so we constantly monitor the level. And then recently the United States Geological Survey, kind of the premier water agency in the country, completed a fairly sophisticated model, mathematical model of the groundwater in Rockland County. So that's been useful too, to say is it sustainable or is it not sustainable? In fact, in this county, it is sustainable, and maybe there's a couple small exceptions to that where particular wells need to be watched carefully. Whereas in other parts of the country, the mining of water from the ground is not sustainable, causing all kinds of problems. You know, the worst of which is subsidence of the land, which occurs in many places. We don't have that issue here. Okay, in the back.
You said you have a surplus of water during the winter time, right?
You said surplus of water in the winter, is that what you said?
Yes. Out of curiosity, do you guys make any effort to store it or anything like that?
Yeah, well, that would be beautiful if we could do that. And you know, we build our reservoirs are large enough so that they'll take some of that surplus and hold it. And what you raise is a perfectly good example. You know, when water's plentiful and it's flowing and it's spilling, put it someplace and save it for later. That can be done, but the process of doing that is so expensive that we really, that's an example of balancing the resources. So, you know, right now we have enough resources, so we wouldn't do something like that. But it certainly is an option. In some places in this region, like there's a reservoir down in northern New Jersey called Point View Reservoir, when it does exactly that. When water's plentiful, they pump it up to a reservoir and they keep it. We don't have a lot of places to do that in this county, but you know, that it is a possibility, and we can look at it. For example, there's quarries throughout the county that are large open spaces, and when and if those quarries are ever finished mining rock, it could be a good place to do something like that.
Program has concluded for now, but we're going to hang around for a little bit if you have some individual questions. Otherwise, you have coming up with another